Hi, I'm Jimmy Colefax, and this is The Story. We're continuing with lovebirds Tony and Mina Gunter, sharing about how the Lord brought them together. Personally, I could listen to their stories all day. They are just a lovely, down-to-earth couple that are really in love with each other and with the Lord. Next, we'll hear more about their lives and about their dreams for ministry in the United States.
Well, we married the pastor. Our friends in Nashville happened to be pastors of a church that Tony was familiar with, because on those trips that he had made to the States before he knew me, he had met this pastor and
I had a strong relationship with a church in Nashville.
Yeah, very strong relationship. Yep. So he's the one that married us. It was a Wednesday night. They had Wednesday night prayer meeting. Then we got married. Then they had worship team practice. Then we all went to the Longhorn for a steak.
Steakhouse.
Oh, you got me hungry here.
There was not a lot of formalities in it, you know.
We both had blue jeans on, and I think I had cowboy boots, and it was just the way it was meant to be. It was just lovely. And then we came back to South Carolina, and my family got to know him a little bit better, because even though they had met him and they liked him when they met him, they didn't know much about him. And now, of course, we have 2 grandchildren. My son has 2 girls, and then Tony has 3 children here, and they all have kids. So we've got 5 grandchildren here. So now we're an international family.
Yeah. So, Tony, how did you finally come around?
Oh, I just, went the distance, basically. We went, once we met, we're face to face. It was pretty much what I'd expected, and there's been adjustments and stuff with cultural differences, as I say, but basically, we've got on pretty well. I remember the first. She was a nurse in the States, and I went and picked her up one night after we were married, and we're driving home, and she goes, "Stop! And I hit the brakes. And I said, "What?" She said, "Turn in here." I said, "It's a Ford dealership." She said, "Yeah," and it was that big. It had a road up the middle, and the vehicles were displayed on this terraced block, and up the top were all the pickup trucks. And she said, "There's a new King Ranch up there." And I thought, "What's a King Ranch?" And it turns out it's a bit like R.M. Williams, It's a old ranch in Texas, and they got this logo on it, and they have this King Ranch F-350 up there with this particular paint job. And anyway, we get out there, and she starts walking around this F-350 pickup. And next thing, she drops the tailgate, spreads her arms across the tailgate, and says, "I'm in love." And I'm thinking, thank you, Jesus. She loves guns, loves trucks. Oh, I'm in.
Loves Jesus.
Yeah, loves Jesus, absolutely,
Oh, wow.
And you
were sold at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, moving along, let's talk about ministry. How did you get into ministry eventually?
Well, for me, it started January 1990. I'm about 9 months out the police force. I'm sitting in the office, I'm doing a word study on motivation of the heart, and one of the references went back to Chronicles. David given Solomon the plans of the temple, and he talked about motivation of the heart. God searches the heart, and he said, "Be careful." He said, because he said, "For I've chosen you to build a temple as a sanctuary." And as I read those words, it wasn't just like the words leaped off the page or anything like that. It was like God spoke those words to me. "For I've chosen you to build a temple as a sanctuary." And I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. I wasn't a pastor. I wasn't thinking about being a pastor. I certainly wasn't thinking about building a church. No idea. And that encounter was followed by 10 years of silence. And each year I'd go back, I'd say, "Do you want to tell me now?" Because I had no idea what you're talking about. And that went on for like 10 years. And 11 years, things started to unfold in my mind about ideas I had for a mobile ministry thing with a semi-trailer, and then I thought, well, maybe there's some Christian truck drivers out there might be interested, and it snowballed on from there, and over the next 10 years, it was like God just unfolded the vision. And God didn't say to Joseph, "I'm going to make you, Prime Minister of Egypt." He gave him a dream about fat cows, skinny cows, sheaves of wheat, And who would ever have equated that to what he finally ended up as? Who would ever have equated what God spoke to me as, building a major ministry to the road transport industry in America?
Well, let's back up before we get to your current dream. Now, you've been in ministry. You've been a pastor. You've been a chaplain.
I had, and back in the early 70s, I was a foundation member. Back in 71, I was a foundation member of God Squad.
Oh, okay. The motorcycle ministry?
Yeah. After we got married, we spent 5 years in the States, and I was a chaplain with Transport for Christ as a volunteer on a truck stop chapel before I got my green card.
Yeah, that's when we were still living in the States. I was still a nurse there, and he was involved in chaplain ministry there. But what I was going to say is, if I can back up for a moment with Tony's story, after he left, when he was in the police force, and even after he left the police force, there were difficulties in the marriage then. And Tony is a bush poet, and I believe that God ministered to him through the bush poetry that he gave him in more ways than I think even Tony realizes. And his poetry has gone on. He recorded 2 albums, and his poetry has gone on to lead hundreds and hundreds of people to Christ, listening to his Christian perspective on things that happened to him during that period in his life. And Bushmen and Heroes it's a full CD with, I don't know how many selections on it.
11.
And then the To the Sunburnt Ear is, of course, the tribute to the Australian soldier. That's the one that's played across the country at Anzac Day. They play that poetry, and the thank you that comes before the poem. There's the thank you and then the To the Sunburnt Ear. And that was the thing that brought Tony together with the CEO the president at Currumbin RSL. That's how they got introduced to each other, because Ron had been playing that for years before he even met Tony.
Oh, okay.
So I believe that the ministry portion of Tony's life involved not just his early years of the God Squad and all that, but I think that poetry really is key. And
it opened doors for us.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that was part of a transitioning that God was using to go forward into the time when he brought your attention to Chronicles, and then from there. And that's just what I know from knowing Tony, because, of course, I wasn't in the picture then.
Yeah. So, Tony, you're part of a dawn service, which is televised nationally every year for Anzac Day?
Yeah, Currumbin RSL. They Channel 7 broadcast it every year.
So many of our listeners could have heard you on that nationally televised telecast. Yeah,
it's my 5 minutes of fame every year.
It's a real honor to be involved there. There's just lovely people there.
I think for me, it's the best dawn service in Australia because it has so much heart to it.
Yeah,
and that's the result of the input of Ron Workman, who's the chairman of the board there.
Yeah.
And the numbers have increased.
Yeah, it's now listed as one of Queensland's major events.
Well, we have to wrap up our conversation, but let's end with your current vision that you're passionate about now.
Well, we have a ministry called Faith Freighters. It's a ministry to long-distance truck drivers. And our big vision for that is to build a thing called the Fifth Wheel Worship Centre. And it will be a truckers' church. It will be a full-service 24/7 truck stop. God willing, and the creek don't rise, it'll be built just outside Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh, wow.
And, it's a huge undertaking, and it's one of those things where you just got to say, well, okay, I've had a number of father and son arguments about it over the years with God. And I remember one particular day, I used to complain about the size of the vision, the insignificant size of the visionary. And he spoke to me one day as clear as a bell about when I birthed the vision heart of Nehemiah to rebuild the wall. He wasn't even a free man. He was a test pilot. He was a cupbearer. He was a test pilot for bad booze. And, but you'll find favour with the king. And so, we've gone on and just hung. I tried a number of times to get it up and running. And it didn't work, so I said to God, I'll tell you what, when you're ready, you let me know. Well, it was only just over 3 months ago that happened, and now things are starting to move so fast, and we think we'll be back in the US chasing this dream before the end of the year.
Wow, things are happening for you.
Yes, they are.
Yes, sir, they are. They are happening, and it's it's just come about in such a way, that sort of took us by surprise. And,
well, it's almost like we come to this intersection because we've been up and down the road to every place you can imagine, talking to everybody that will listen. So we've talked to everybody, nothing's happened, and it's like we've come to this intersection, and God is standing right in the middle of the intersection directing the traffic, saying, okay, now this is the direction you go, this is the people you see. And when we turn and do that, it has become very fruitful. So we'll be incorporated as a Christian entity within a month. We'll be listed as a church in Tennessee. So it's starting to happen. It's starting to grow legs and arms, and it's pretty exciting once it gets going because it's God's momentum.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing, how you met, your backstories, but now the exciting things that you're doing now. Thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Thank you for having
You're
us.
welcome.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
That was Tony and Mina Gunter having a chat with Eric Scatterbo and sharing their unique story as a couple, both madly in love with each other and on fire for the Lord. It was great to hear about their future plans for ministering to truck drivers near Nashville, Tennessee. We wish them all the best and pray for God to lead and guide them in this wonderful adventure and supply all their needs. Well, thanks for joining us for Tony and Mina Gunter's sharing their story today. I'm Jimmy Colefax, encouraging you to share your story with someone today.